Welcome everyone to Let's Learn.net. This month we are focused on accessibility for your mobile, desktop, and web applications. I am one of your hosts, James Montemagno. I want to thank everyone for tuning in, whether you're on YouTube, Twitch, or Learn TV. I do want to let everyone know if you are looking for closed captions, those are available on Learn TV at aka.ms/LearnTV. I'm really excited this month. We've been focusing every single month on different topics to get you started on your journey as a .NET developer. In the past, we've taken a look at C#. We've taken a look at building web applications or web API applications and microservices. And every single month, we cover a brand new topic. Normally, you have Jamie Singleton here, who is the host and creator of Let's Learn.net. However, she is off getting ready for Microsoft Build right now. So I have stepped in, usually behind the scenes with my good friend, John Galloway, to moderate the chat and answer all of your questions and feed them up into Jamie so she can ask them to our amazing guests. But this month, you have to put up with me. We're here for the next 2 hours. So we have quite a lot to cover. I'm really excited because I have two of my best friends in the entire world. Rachel Kang from the .NET Maui team, who specializes on accessibility. I had her recently on the Xamarin show, specifically talking about accessibility, and collaborated with her on a brand new Microsoft Learn module for accessibility with Xamarin Forms. And she has an amazing blog series on the Xamarin blog, sort of on telling people the journey to accessibility, not only if you're just getting started or in what the team is doing with accessibility in Xamarin and .NET Maui. I also have my good friend John Galloway here. He'll be talking later on today about web accessibility for building applications with ASP.NET Core. So let me go ahead and bring up the slide deck here. And what I want to say, everyone, is, of course, thanks everyone for tuning in. And don't forget that you can find all of the agenda, everything at aka.ms/letslearn.net, including all the workshops that we're going to go through live, which is quite good. And our agenda for today is going to be look a little bit like this. Actually, Rachel, our accessibility expert, is going to give us a 101 overview of accessibility, what it means to create accessible applications, how to make our apps more accessible, and how we can ensure that everybody that is using our applications is able to use them effectively. In between every single bit and piece, we'll be answering questions. If you have questions, you can answer them in Twitch, in YouTube, or Learn TV. We're here to answer all of your questions, so feel free to log in, ask some questions away, and we have everyone behind the scenes moderating and feeding questions up to me later on. Like I said, these are the three people you'll be hanging out with today: myself, Rachel, and John. And Rachel will be hanging out with us for the most time, talking about accessibility, and then going through the Xamarin Forms workshop for mobile applications. And then John will join a little bit later and talk about web accessibility, building applications with ASP.NET Core. Other thing I wanted to tell everyone about is that we've actually, Learn TV has partnered with ChickTech to kind of co-run and co-organize virtual conferences. The ACT W 2021, which is Amplifying Tech with Diversity, is a virtual conference upcoming. It's a virtual conference for technologists of all genders, ages, and professions. You can check it out at act-w.org. Early bird tickets are on sale, so you can take a look at that. And you'll hear a lot about ChickTech presentations and conferences all throughout of the month here, leading up to different events that have been going on. So definitely check that out. All right, now hopefully we'll see. We had some technical fun with accessibility, which I think Rachel will be able to talk a little bit about. But without further ado, I'm going to bring in Rachel. Ooh. Rachel, your audio is a little crazy. Uh-oh. Let's see what I think. Maybe let's see if StreamYard picked something wrong. It went all crazy. Yep. Okay. Yeah, so something's going on with Rachel's audio. Uh-oh. Everything was working so good earlier. Let's see what's going on. Yeah, see if StreamYard maybe picked the wrong audio source. Or maybe something happened with it. Nope. Interesting. maybe have you refresh and then come back maybe.
How is that?
Oh, that's perfect. We did it. Yay. What happened?
I don't know.
No worries. Well, now we can hear you and everything's good. All good. How you been, Rachel?
Good. It's nice to be here talking to you again. I'm super excited for what we have in store today.
Awesome. I'm real excited as well because, like you said, going into your journey and into accessibility, you got to start somewhere, and that's what we're kind of here to help everyone kind of get ready in their adventure and make more accessible applications. But I think I always look at accessibility as I can read documentation and I can implement some APIs, but to me, I think actually understanding, the importance of accessible applications and the fundamentals are really important. So you're the expert, so I'm going to go ahead and bring up your screen and let you take it away, okay?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, go for it.
I guess to start with a little bit of perspective. Right now, there are over 7.8 billion people in the world today. And it's kind of crazy, that's a lot of people. But beyond that, what that kind of means is that there are such a diverse slate of experiences and identities, that we need to always be considering as well. And these identities are really far ranging, Um, We have education, nationality, ability, income, age, life experiences, just to name a few. And there's so many different ways in which people identify. And I just wanted to kind of emphasize this because when we're creating inclusive products, it's important that we're mindful of all of these different identities. And today we'll be focusing primarily on accessibility. And although accessible solutions, when they're best created, benefit everyone, they do tend to typically address mainly the identity of ability. And when we talk about ability alone, though, there are over 1 billion people who are currently experiencing some form of disability. And that, too, is a significant number. And not only that, but even when we're talking about disabilities, there's a huge range of just disabilities alone as well. This tool called the Persona Spectrum, included in Microsoft's Inclusive 101 Design Toolkit, is a really helpful tool for helping us to understand and visualize this better. So disabilities are super wide-ranging because they can be permanent, temporary, or situational, and they range across all different types of abilities, including the ability to touch, see, hear, and speak. So for example, if we look here at this second row for C, an example of a permanent disability in this category is someone who is blind. A temporary disability is someone who has a cataract, and an example of a situational disability is someone who is a distracted driver. And you can see how tools like voice assistant, for example, might benefit people who fit in all of these categories. And so, as I was saying, designing for accessibility isn't limited to just people experiencing disabilities, and the best solutions benefit everyone. And you might be familiar with most, if not all, of these solutions that were initially designed with accessibility in mind, but actually benefit everyone. So for example, closed captioning on videos, the raise hand feature on Microsoft Teams, dark mode on devices, drop curbs on sidewalks and driveways, and so much more. And there is also a case to be made for the huge business opportunity with regard to accessibility. So since there are over 1 billion people who have a disability, you can imagine that when you neglect that audience, you're missing out on a business opportunity worth hundreds of billions of dollars. And businesses who neglect the disabled community may also face a growing number of legal consequences in our growing digital age where more and more people are using apps. So then you might be wondering what can we do about this, especially when we're creating apps? How can we make them more accessible? So there are a number of standards and guidelines out there that kind of guide along app developers in being able to achieve this. And of them, one of the most notable ones are the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines have become a global accessibility standard and legal benchmark for both web and mobile. And they're based on these 4 principles that all apps and websites should be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And the guidelines are, if you want to go check them out, the link is here. They're actually extremely detailed. They go into so much depth on how you can develop your apps to be perceivable with, for example, various different types of text alternatives, how you can make them operable, to kind of be accessible via different accessibility tools, how they can be understandable, robust, and so forth. All these guidelines and standards aside, however, it's always important to remember at the end of the day that empathy is the name of the game. We need to understand our users and our app's customers, and that's what all of this is inevitably about. And how you can do that is by exploring the various accessibility settings and features that your app users are using, and that includes screen readers, for example, TalkBack on Android, VoiceOver on iOS, Narrator on UWP, just to name a few. You can research various accessibility models and APIs, and test and leverage the wide range of available tools and resources that are out there. And lucky for us, we'll be doing all of these things today in our very first workshop on creating accessible apps with Xamarin Forms. So to kind of, I guess, segue into that, prerequisites involve familiarity with building and deploying Xamarin Forms app, which I hope you all are familiar with Xamarin Forms, but if not, you will be learning about Xamarin Forms more today. And also familiarity with the concepts of accessibility, disability, inclusion, which you now already have. So let's jump into this workshop module then. We're going to be learning how to enable screen readers, navigation assistance tools. We're going to be learning about automation properties and how to use them to improve accessibility, and also how to improve accessibility with meaningful content ordering. Alrighty, so if you don't have the workshop module open yet, you can navigate it from the agenda right here, create accessible apps with Xamarin Forms. And that should take you here. So I'm going to go ahead and press start. And let's see what we've got here. All right. So let's take a look at this example scenario. Suppose you've been hired to build an app by using Xamarin Forms. Our graphic designer already created the specifications for the app. These specifications include elements that don't automatically provide hints for screen readers, such as images and entries. And to ensure that the app is accessible to every user, you'll extend these controls with accessibility features that Xamarin Forms provides. Okay, so if you don't already have Visual Studio downloaded, this is a prerequisite for the module. You'll need to download Visual Studio for Windows or for Mac if you're on Mac.
Can you zoom in for me just a little bit there, Rachel?
Yes.
And yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you.
There you go. Okay. So while people are downloading that, if you haven't installed it already, let me just go over real quick again what we'll be doing. We're going to be enabling the screen reader on the device of your choice, learning more about how to use it. Then you'll be creating a Xamarin application and adding Xamarin Forms properties for accessibility called automation properties, and also implementing meaningful content ordering, all to improve the accessibility of the app. And by the end of this module, you'll be much more familiar with accessibility than you were before. Continue. All right, so what exactly are screen readers? You might not be too familiar with them if you don't use them on the regular. Screen readers, essentially, they come in all different forms, and there are various different types that are provided on various different platforms. And what they essentially do is they'll read out the information on the screen, and it's especially helpful for individuals with visual impairments. So we're going to be going through some of these screen readers today. On the next page here, we have some examples of various screen readers and how you can activate them based on which device you're on. So if you have an Android device, you can enable TalkBack, which is one of the most popular screen readers for Android. And there are instructions here you can follow, going into your settings, to accessibility, and turning TalkBack on. If you're on an iOS device, which is what I will be using myself today, you can activate VoiceOver, which is the main screen reader on iOS. And you can go into the settings, to accessibility, find VoiceOver, and turn that on. And if you're on a Windows device, the screen reader you can check out is Narrator. And you can activate Narrator by clicking on the Windows Control and Enter keys on your keyboard, or by going into your settings and finding Narrator. And again, these are just a few different screen readers. There are so many more kinds that are out there, but these are just a few that can help you get started.
Got a good question for you, Rachel, before we go on. So what does a screen reader actually do, and how does it work? Like, why does someone use a screen reader, and why are we using it in this exercise?
Yeah, great question. So what the screen reader does, as I was saying before, it's primarily helpful for individuals who have visual impairments. So when you can't really see what's actually happening on the screen visually, or you're having more trouble seeing what's going on, then hearing what's on the screen is a great modality of taking in that information. And actually another mode, which we won't be covering today, but screen readers can also assist people who not only have visual impairments, but also auditory impairments, because they can take in the information via Braille. So that being said, now I'm going to actually go into my device on my iOS and activate the screen reader. And let's see if I can show you what that looks like for me. All right, so can you see this?
Yep, we can see it. We were having some, in case people are wondering, we were having some audio technical difficulties. Rachel had it all set up perfect, screen mirroring, and then the audio wouldn't come through, and that's a little important for the screen reader. So yeah.
Yep. So I'll be trying my best to show you by holding it up like this. All right, so I'm gonna go to my settings here, settings, and then I'm going to scroll down and click on accessibility. And then in accessibility, as you saw on the module screenshots, there's VoiceOver on top. So I'll be clicking on VoiceOver to turn it on. And I will turn it on here. Sorry, it's a bit hard to see. All right, I'll turn on VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on. Settings. VoiceOver. Switch button. On.
So now you can see
Double tap to
VoiceOver
toggle setting.
creates this border around various controls. And all screen readers generally act like this. They'll outline this current control you're on and read out information that describes that control. And you can navigate your screen by tapping on different controls, Or if you want to see which order they're designed to go in, you can take one finger and swipe right. So if I swipe right here,
VoiceOver speaks items on the screen.
It'll go to the very next label that is on the screen and read that out loud to me. Okay then. All right, so let's hop back into the module then. And I'm gonna go next now that I have my screen reader on. And also I want to note that if you're unfamiliar with screen readers at all, it takes some time to familiarize yourself with them. And a lot of the platforms do have tutorials that help you to get familiar with them. So I highly recommend checking out those tutorials on your own time to build familiarity with screen readers so that when you test your apps with screen readers in the future, you'll be a bit more savvy with them and it'll become a lot easier.
Screen dimmed.
Okay. So now I'm going to talk a bit about Xamarin Forms automation properties. So on Xamarin Forms, we have automation properties, which are just like any other properties on Xamarin Forms, except they're specific to accessibility, and they help the screen readers decide how things should be read on the screen and what should be read aloud. So for example, one of the properties we have is called isInAccessible_tree. And when you set this property, automation properties .isInAccessible_tree equals true on any given control, that tells the app and the screen reader that we want this control to be accessible by the screen reader. Similarly, if you indicate that you want isInAccessible_tree to be set to false, then that control will not be accessible by the screen reader. And what I mean when I say accessible by the screen reader is that the screen reader will not create a border and outline that control, and it will not read out anything from it. The next automation property we have here is called name. So that's automation properties.name. And here you can specify a string that you want to be read aloud by the screen reader. So for example, if we have an activity indicator, normally because the activity indicator doesn't have any text associated with it, the screen reader will not read anything out loud in most cases. But if we specify this automation properties.name, we can say, hey, this is a progress indicator. So we want the screen reader to say progress indicator out loud. So if you don't have the visual cues to see that it is an activity indicator, you can still be able to understand that it is by hearing that it is because we set this property. Similarly, we have a property called help text, and automation properties.help text enables us to give more information about a certain control, and this description is also read aloud by the screen reader. So for example, if we have a button here that says toggle, the screen reader might read that text toggle. Again, this kind of varies depending on the platform and framework you use, but it might read out the text toggle. And if we indicate the help text, it'll give us further information about this toggle button, telling us it toggles the activity indicator, which can be helpful to have that additional context. And as I was saying, screen readers, depending on what platform you're using, which screen reader you're using, they can vary a lot in the order in which the various properties are announced. And how they're announced depending on the control. And this is just because the native platforms have made different decisions on what that behavior should be. But it's best to kind of align with those native behaviors at the end, because screen reader users who are generally just using the same devices they're familiar with will see consistent behavior across the apps on those devices that they're using. And last but not least, we have an automation property called labeled by. And this actually is currently a property that only works on Android, and this is because, Android and Windows, because it aligns with APIs that are only natively available on those platforms at the moment. And what labeled by does is it allows us to essentially set an automation property .name for it by referencing another control. So in this example here, we have a label and an entry. And on the entry, we can indicate that we want it to be labeled by this label by accessing the name that we've set to it. And so when we access this entry, it'll tell us that it's an entry to enter your name. And that's pretty cool, because otherwise the entry would just be read as an entry and we wouldn't have any more context as to what type of entry this is. Okay, so let's do a knowledge check. James, do you want to help me out here?
Sure, I'll see if I was paying attention.
All right. In Xamarin Forms, what property needs to be set to ensure that an element is available to an accessible app?
Well, I know that you covered name and labeled by, because those are properties that you would set if they are accessible in the accessibility tree. So I'm going to go with number 2 is an accessible tree.
All right. We'll see soon if that's correct.
Okay.
All right. Second question. What term refers to the feature that reads out loud the elements on an application?
Well, you did turn on voiceover and you said talkback is Android, narrator is Windows. So I'm assuming we're talking about the generic term, which would be screen reader.
Yeah. All right, let's check our answers.
It's as if I wrote these questions myself.
Amazing.
We do have a quick question for you, Rachel, in the chat. Question from Learn TV was coming in and asking, we're using Xamarin Forms here. You're kind of going through. What is Xamarin Forms doing under the hood, right? Like, let's say you weren't using Xamarin Forms. Can you achieve the same, accessibility features?
Yeah, great question. So Xamarin Forms, for those who are less familiar with it, it's a cross-platform application framework. And what that means is it allows our developers to be able to develop apps that are compatible on all of these different platforms, on iOS, Android, Windows, and so forth. And what we're doing behind the hood is we're mapping down these properties to the native properties that it kind of matches down to for each platform. So for example, with automation properties .name, we're mapping that down to the content description, which is a native Android API. And we're also mapping it down to accessibility label, which is the native iOS API. So similarly, we're doing similar things with all of the different properties. And the native platforms all have their own set of accessibility APIs that you can leverage as well.
Oh, perfect. That's great. Thank you very much, Rachel.
Yep. And that's why with the labeled by property, for example, I was saying that it's currently not supported on iOS. And it's because that property doesn't currently have a native equivalent on iOS.
Gotcha. So it does its best to map where possible.
Yep, exactly. So that's what we're doing under the hood.
Gotcha.
All right, then. Let's go on to our first exercise. So exciting. So I'm on my Mac, so I'm going to click on VS Mac, and the instructions here will change for me depending on which platform I'm using. And okay, let's follow these instructions. So create a Xamarin app. I'm gonna move this to the side. I'm gonna open Visual Studio here. I'm gonna select a new project. And I'm gonna go to multi-platform app, blank forms app, and then select next. And I'm going to call my app accessible app. Next, create. And boom, we're going to have our app solution coming up here in Visual Studio.
Another question for you, Rachel, is the screen reader functionality available on the simulators and emulators or only on physical devices?
That's a great question. So it depends is the answer. What I found is that on Android emulators, you can try to access it. So generally so TalkBack, in addition to being in the settings, is an app that you can actually download in the Google Play Store. So what I have done personally is on my Android emulators, I've gone into the App Store and I've downloaded TalkBack, and that makes it available through the settings in which I can turn it on. And for the most part, it works well. But this isn't something that's available on the iOS simulators as far as I know. And the thing is that when it comes to accessibility, it's always important to be testing on the manual.
Page 1 of 2.
Oops. The manual physical device, because our screen reader users will be using the physical device themselves. So as helpful as simulators and emulators can be, that is kind of limited in terms of testing for accessibility. At the end of the day, we want to go back to the physical device.
You can turn down the volume just a little bit. It's quite loud too.
Okay.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Let me turn off.
Selected.
Okay.
Voiceover off.
Turned off voiceover for now, so it won't interrupt us.
Perfect.
All right. So now we have the Visual Studio IDE open, and we have here some code to help us create the data entry form. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to copy the code, but I highly recommend writing the code out yourself to learn it in the best way possible. And I'm going to go to this first folder here with all of our shared code. And I'm going to go to the main page. And I'm just going to delete all of this and replace it with what we have here. So what we have here going on is a stack layout, which is just a general linear layout with a label saying please submit information for the project. We have an image of a .NET bot. We have a label that says project name, and we have an entry and then a submit button. Cool. Let's run this app now to see what that looks like. Since I'm running on iOS, I'm gonna set the iOS project as my startup project. I'm going to try to find my iPhone. I have to connect it. It's not connected. Boom. It's connected here now. And then I'm going to run the app. And I'll show you what this looks like on my screen. And then I'll turn on this voiceover again to show you kind of what is happening on my screen. And again, note that depending on what device and platform you're using, the screen reader behavior will vary. But for demonstration purposes, I'll just be focusing on the iPhone today.
So you'd say it's best to start testing on whatever device you have, but always best to test on all of them.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep. So while we're waiting for this to build, let's go over what we'll be doing afterwards. So I'm running this now to show you what we're starting with. And I want you to understand like how we'll be improving the accessibility. And we'll be improving it by using these automation properties that we just talked about. So there might be certain things here that aren't currently accessible. And so we'll be making them accessible by telling our screen readers that we want them to be in the accessibility tree and indicating what we want the screen readers to read aloud by using is an accessible tree and name automation properties, for example. And then we'll also be improving the accessibility of other controls by using the label by property that I talked about previously. And we'll also be using the help text property to improve the accessibility of the button. So we'll be leveraging all of the automation properties that we just talked about. So many technical difficulties today.
Where your machine's probably doing a lot with everything. Let's see if we have another question in the chat while we wait for it to build and deploy. As I see it deploys now. The next question I have in the chat room is, there's also desktop applications for Mac. I'm assuming Mac also has a screen reader.
Yep, so Mac also uses VoiceOver actually. So if you go to your system preferences, you can find the setting for VoiceOver and check that out.
Perfect. And one other question was, someone was asking, you did mention it, but I just wanted to have you repeat it here, was
Yes.
What if an individual, how do we make our applications accessible for someone that might be blind and deaf?
Yeah, exactly. So individuals who are blind and deaf, they might be using the screen reader with a Braille output. So in addition to screen readers are just one form of accessibility, one accessibility tool. There are so many more accessibility tools like keyboards that you can connect into your device. And there are also specialized Braille keyboards and alternative keyboards that individuals experiencing disabilities use. So screen readers are also compatible with Braille output. And so that's just one example of how individuals who are both deaf and blind might be able to benefit from screen readers.
Gotcha. So it's one of the very first tools in the toolbox to make applications more accessible, but there's a lot more that could be done.
Oh yeah, there's plenty more.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, so it looks like the app has deployed now. You can see here, we have that label, the image, the project name label, and it might be hard to see, but there's an entry right below that, and then the submit button. So I'm going to turn on VoiceOver now, and let's see what it does.
VoiceOver on. Accessible app. Please submit information for the project.
So it reads out the first label, and I'm going to swipe now. So it's not letting me swipe. Let me try clicking on the image. Oh, it's not working. I guess it's not accessible. Is this accessible?
Project name.
Okay, I guess that's accessible. It reads out its project name. Let me check out the entry.
Text field.
Okay,
double tap to edit.
Text field. And then
submit button.
The submit button just gets read out as a submit button. Okay, so what we're seeing here is that the labels are accessible, the entry is accessible, buttons accessible. We could use some additional information for the entry and the button, and the image just wasn't accessible at all. We couldn't even click on it. So let's change that with the various improvements I described earlier. So
CSS demo 2.
All right, I'm gonna hop back into the code, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna first make the image accessible. We're gonna add this automation property. So in the image, I'm going to add is an accessible tree equals true so that the screen reader will be able to reach it. And not only do I want it to be reached, because what's the point of reaching it if the screen reader is not going to read anything, right? We want to tell the screen reader to reach it and also read image of .NET bot. That's what I want the screen reader to say when we're on the image.
A good question for you too that came in is, why did you spell DOT-NET-BOT if .NET is literally .NET, right?
That's a great question. So with various words, it depends on the screen readers and how smart they are. But if I just write .NET as .net as you might be used to seeing it like this. Depending on the screen reader, it won't read out as .net, although we're familiar with it as .net. It might read it as .net, or just think the dot is a period and stop there, and then read net. And there are various different ways that the screen reader might interpret it. So we want to give it the text that will make it as clear as possible. So in this case, we've decided that just writing .net like this will get the effect that we want.
Perfect. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, of course. All right, so now the accessibility of the image is improved. Let's check out the entry accessibility here. I'm going to copy these automation properties and paste it inside the entry. And so what we're doing here is we're setting the label by property to reference label name, which is the name of the preceding label. But as I mentioned before, this only works on Android and Windows. So on iOS, we want to still make the entry more accessible. So we're going to just set the automation properties.name property and have that read project name. And this platform-specific feature of Xamarin Forms enables us to do that. And last but not least, we're going to make the button more accessible by adding some additional context for what the button actually does. So I'm going to add this automation property here. And so in addition to reading it aloud as a submit button, the screen reader will also tell us that this button submits the project information to the backend, which is helpful in letting us know exactly what's going on. I'm going to run that again, and I'll show you again how it acts with the screen reader, and hopefully we'll be able to see a much more accessible app experience already.
Perfect. So we just had a lot of people come in from another Twitch stream from Jeff Fritz's stream. So if you're just joining us for the first time, we're doing Let's Learn .NET Accessibility. So Rachel just created the first application.
Accessible app. Please submit it.
You could turn it down a little bit too. It wasn't accessible, so now she's adding these accessibility flags to make the application more accessible. That's good. That's good.
Okay, great. All right. Sorry about that.
Please submit information for the project.
So now we have the app running again. We've just added the automation properties, and click on this again.
Please submit information for the project.
It reads out the label as before. If I swipe right now, hopefully we'll be able to access the image.
Image of .NET Bob. Image.
Look at that. So now the image is accessible and it's reading the specified text as we want it to. Now we have project name.
Project name. Text field.
And now the
Tap to edit.
text field, instead of just being read aloud as a generic text field, it's saying project name text field as we want it to. And last but not least,
Submit button. Submits project information to backend.
the submit button now also tells us that it submits the project information to the backend as we indicated with the help text. So already the app is so much more accessible.
Very cool. One question that I had was that I noticed that sometimes the screen reader announces what the control is, like a button. Are there any best practices in setting these help texts or label by or names or anything like that? Like we used image of .NET Bot. Should image be in that name is a good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So depending on the control, and again, depending on the platform, the behavior will be different. A lot of times with a control, like a text field, for example, you won't have to indicate that it's a text field. It'll just tell you natively. So as you might have noticed with the entry, initially it just got read aloud as a text field. We didn't indicate that anywhere, but that's just what happens natively when you implement a entry on iOS. And we only indicated project name. We didn't write project name text field because that would be redundant. It would tell us, text field, project name, text field. It would be very redundant. And we want to avoid that redundancy because that also is an example of something that's not quite accessible. And so ultimately, as always, we just need to go back to activating our screen readers, testing it out, and seeing what the different devices on the different platforms are doing.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Alrighty. All right. So now we're going to move on to the next unit, ordering content for accessibility. So another way to improve accessibility is in the way we're actually ordering the content that's on our screen. And normally what happens is just like based on the order in which you're adding the different controls to your layout or the orientation of the layout, these are some factors that influence the order in which the elements are read by the screen reader. And when I say the order, what I'm referring to is, as you might have noticed before, I was using one finger to swipe right to navigate through the screen. And that order is what I'm referring to. It's the order that the screen readers read the elements in when I'm trying to just click next, essentially. Okay, so yes, so okay, I think we're ready for this knowledge check then. James, are you there?
I am here. I am ready.
All right, so let's check this one out. By default, what's the order in which users of screen readers and keyboards can move through the screen?
It's a good question. Well, you would think almost that it's from top to bottom or left to right because it's as you're swiping through, but maybe individuals have their device in right to left and not all the items are in the accessibility tree. In this case, everything was in a perfect grid. But I do believe it's in the order in which they're listed in the XAML or added to the layout.
Yay!
Yay!
Amazing.
All right.
Yeah. And yeah, a lot of the times that order will be left to right and top to bottom. So in a way, this answer can be inclusive of the other answer choices as well. But by default, it is the order in which they're listed in the code and added to the layout.
Perfect. We had a few questions before we move on to the next activity really quick, if that's cool with you.
Yes.
From Jacqueline over on Learn TV asks, well, it was more of a statement, but she was saying that if you can't hear anything for some elements, maybe on Android or on iOS or different ones, and you don't hear something, don't forget to add in accessible tree, like we talked about in the exercise, because you said sometimes different elements are in the accessible tree by default, correct?
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of the controls will be in the accessible tree by default a lot of time. So for example, text-based controls, a lot of the time by default, they'll be in the accessible tree and the text associated with those text controls will be read aloud. But sometimes, like with an image, that might not be the case, which is why in this scenario, we had to specifically specify that the image should be in the accessible tree.
Gotcha. And one more question for you really quick from Foss on Twitch asks, are you able to tweak it specific per platform for screen readers? Which is kind of something what you did in the code. So maybe you just show the code, I guess, there.
Yeah, definitely. So on Xamarin Forms, we have these on-platform tags, and that allows you to indicate if you want things to behave differently across different platforms. So before we added this label by property, but because we know that this isn't currently supported on iOS, we also added this name property that we want only to be accessible on iOS. So on iOS, for iOS, we indicated that we want this property to be set. And you can do something similar with all of the different platforms that we support on Xamarin Forms.
Awesome. One more question, because Jacqueline is very engaged over on Learn TV. She was asking on the automation property name, which you're using here on that image of .NET Bot. She says that property gets read after the text property, or on some of the other ones, for example, which may be a bit confusing. Is there a way that the ordering of that, or how does that work? Is there best practices on setting those?
Yeah, so the ordering, that's usually determined by what the native platforms have decided to do by default. Depending on what you're trying to do, you can try to concatenate the various things you want in the name. So for example, instead of setting both the name and help text, if you want, you can combine what you want into just the name, for example.
Got it.
But generally, it's advised to just stick to what the properties are doing, because natively, the native behavior that occurs, even if it might not be intuitive for a non-screen reader user, it will be more natural to screen reader users who are used to that ordering that they are more familiar with, because that's what they've seen on their device.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah. Okay. Let's move on to the next exercise then and see how we can order some content for accessibility. All right, I'm gonna, again, for the sake of time, just copy this, but again, I recommend writing it all in if you have the time for it. The best learning practices. I'm gonna paste in this grid that will enable us to input some information about you, your manager, and your name and your manager's name. And for the sake of time, I'm not going to run it right now, and I'll run it afterwards when it's more accessible. But basically, what you'll see is a grid that looks like this. You'll see you, the manager, enter forename, enter forename, enter surname, enter surname. And what the screen readers will do when you activate it is it'll go start on you, and then it'll go to manager, and then I'll say enter forename, enter forename, enter surname, enter surname. And you can imagine how that might not be the most accessible experience, especially if you can't see this layout. Just hearing you, manager, enter forename, enter forename, enter surname is a really confusing order. So we can actually fix this and make it more accessible by setting it up to look like this down here. So if we set it up like this, it'll be read as you, your forename, your surname, and then manager, manager's forename, manager's surname. And just from listening, you can see how that's a much more intuitive and accessible ordering of the various controls. So I'm going to switch up the ordering now to reflect that. So here, what exactly are we changing? We have you, manager, and instead of being on the top, we want them to be on the left in the first column. So I'm going to indicate this, that I want this to be in the second row, and it's 0 indexed, which is why it's 1. And actually, by default, for grid layouts on Xamarin Forms, you don't need to indicate 0 if it's 0. So for example, here, having 0 is the same thing as not indicating anything for simplicity. So we want that to be in the second row, and then enter forename. These are also super generic because it says enter forename and enter surname for both. So we're going to change it to your forename and your surname, manager's forename and manager's surname to be more specific. And we also want it to be in the right place. So we're going to change the grid row column ordering placement. All right, so your forename should be in grid row 0, grid column 1. Your surname should be in grid row 0, grid column 2. And again, I'm not indicating the zeros because for the sake of simplicity, we don't have to. It's automatic in Xamarin Forms. And then for here, managers for name, we want it to be in grid row 1, grid column 1, which it is, and then grid row 1, grid column 2. Alrighty, let's run that up. And as I described before, it should read it in the more logical, meaningful content order now of you, your forename, your surname, manager, manager's forename, manager's surname.
It looks like their question came in is those labels also have the is inaccessible tree marked as true. Is that a good practice to have?
Yeah, so generally speaking, as I was saying before, it might not be necessary because text-based controls should be accessible by default on most platforms. But depending on the platform, it might not be the case. And so it might be wise to just add that in. And again, like the best way to test for all of these things is just to activate the screen reader and test it out manually, because that's what our users will be doing.
Perfect, thanks.
All right, so I have the more accessible app up now. And as you can see here, we have the code that we implemented earlier, and we have the new grid here with you, your forename, your surname, manager, manager's forename, manager's surname. So I'm going to skip down to that, and I'm going to swipe, and we'll see which order it goes in. Hopefully it'll go in the order that we want it to. So here I'm on you. I'm going to swipe. I think it's harder for me to do from this angle. You.
Your forename.
Your forename.
Double your surname.
Your surname. Sorry.
Double tap to edit.
Hopefully you can hear it. Manager.
Manager. Manager's forename.
Manager's forename.
Manager's surname.
And manager's surname.
We could hear
it.
Amazing. Okay. All right. So congratulations. You've created a much more accessible app by, well, first of all, you created a new Xamarin Forms app from scratch, and then you were able to find those points of inaccessibility and make it more accessible using automation properties, which you learned about today, and also with more meaningful content ordering, which you also learned about today. And that's amazing. And there's a note here also that although we made it more accessible with regard to screen order by kind of moving things around, another way to change the accessibility order, if you're interested in exploring this more in the future, is by leveraging even more complex APIs that allow you to indicate the order in which you want things to be read. And we do have APIs like that that are in the works for .NET MAUI and are actually also in the Xamarin Community Toolkit right now if you want to check it out. So here on the last summary page, you can find a bunch of references that you can check out to continue learning more about Xamarin Forms and .NET MAUI accessibility and accessibility in general. And as you can see, I've accessed these references myself already. And I also encourage you all to stay tuned for more to come in .NET MAUI. So we're constantly making improvements in Xamarin Forms in terms of accessibility. If you aren't using Xamarin Forms 5 already, I highly encourage you all to get on there, where we've addressed a number of accessibility bugs already. And there are also new improvements coming, for example, with an accessibility experimental flag, which includes a lot of fixes for Android in particular. And we're also working on many new accessibility APIs in .NET MAUI. For example, we have all these all new semantic properties that you can check out in Preview 3, which is already out, and also in later versions, of course. And as I mentioned, we have some APIs in the Xamarin Community Toolkit, and you can download the latest preview NuGet and check those out and start using some of those new APIs and improvements in your Xamarin Forms apps today. And last but not least, we also have this Allied Tools repository that my teammate Shane and I have been working on to kind of explore some even more APIs for accessibility that we want to introduce. And please stay tuned for more. You can keep in touch and check out our GitHub, check out the specs where we're brainstorming all of these new accessibility APIs, check out the .NET MAUI repository. And I keep saying .NET MAUI, I'm sorry. But for those of you who might not be familiar yet, .NET MAUI is the next evolution of Xamarin Forms, and it's going to be big, and it's going to be more accessible, and it's going to be awesome. And we also have an accessibility blog post series that I recently started, so you can go there to check out some more learnings. And there's actually a second post coming very soon, some insider info for you. As James mentioned earlier, we've also talked about accessibility a bit on the Xamarin Show. We have monthly accessibility panels on the Xamarin team, so if you're interested in joining those, please feel free to reach out to me. And we also have the .NET Evolution Discord, which if you're not on it, I recommend you to join right now at this link and join the MAUI accessibility channel and come chat with me. So yeah, that's all for now, and I hope you'll all continue on your journeys for accessibility, and please keep in touch with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Rachel. It was really great to actually see the module that we worked on together actually work and go through everything. So that was super cool. We put a lot of love and passion into making that Learn module for everyone to help make more accessible apps. And I wanted to mention, like you said at the very end there's a lot of work going into .NET MAUI, but also the Xamarin Community Toolkit recently, like you said, got a bunch of new features that you and Shane from the team have been working on.
Yes.
So I think that's really, really awesome.
Right here, I have it actually, the PR that you so kindly started. And there's a bunch of those new APIs that people can check out on the Xamarin Community Toolkit right now.
Yeah, it was fun for me to copy and paste all of Shane's code. He's like, I'm busy. Can you make the PR? And I said, absolutely. One thing I wanted to talk about is that, at least for me on my accessibility journey in my mobile applications is something that I just sort of assumed the platform sort of did. I was like, well, if I just use standard controls and I'm using native controls, it should just do it. And I think the biggest thing for me after talking with you and with Shane and watching videos was just go turn on the narrator and use your app. So use your own app and realize that probably what you thought what the platform was going to do for you is not what it ends up doing. And there's so much more that you can do in your application and more accessible. The one thing I always like to do too is, I was an Android user for a decade, and then, but even though I was an Android user, I was still building iOS apps. So what I did is I did a challenge, which was, use an iOS device for a week. And I do this with almost every new operating system release. Now I'm an iOS user, but I'll use Android for a week when Android 12 comes out just to see and experience it. But I did a challenge as well, which was use only the screen reader for a whole day. That's the only way you can use your device, and you get to really, live how your users are going to use your application and the device itself. So I think that's really helpful. Any other pro tips from you, Rachel?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's great. That's one of the best ways to learn. And I myself am still learning a lot. I just got started on my accessibility journey very recently as well. And so, although I'm trying my best right now to teach you everything that I've learned myself, I'm still learning. And actually, in the next accessibility blog post that's about to come up, I talk about some of these things in terms of screen readers specifically, and how we can understand the screen reader user experience better. And something interesting that I actually learned while writing that post is that most screen reader, like an overwhelming majority of screen reader users, believe that the reason why their websites are inaccessible is because the developers are unaware of accessibility or just don't have the skills for accessibility, which was just so shocking to me and very kind of upsetting, you know. But through our learning journey together and through accessing all of these resources, we can definitely all become more aware, become more skilled, and change that for the better.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I also want to do a shout out to the Microsoft does an it's like a summit, accessibility summit every year.
Yeah, the Ability Summit.
The Ability Summit just happened like 2 weeks ago and is available like on demand and to the public too. So definitely give that a look. It happens every year, talking about making all products more accessible, not just development, but and software, but everything. Which is really, really, really great to see. And we're working hard to make all of our live streams more accessible. We partner with the Learn TV team to have live closed captioning on all of them. And ASL interpreters we are looking into as well in the future. So we're always attempting to make everything more accessible. Rachel, thank you so much for going through everything for mobile applications.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
Awesome. Well, you have an absolutely amazing Friday and a great weekend. And I'm really excited for next week, Microsoft Build, and of course, all the great new Maui stuff that you and the team are working on. Really appreciate you being here.
All right, thank you. Looking forward to hearing from everyone.
All right. Bye, Rachel.
Bye.
Awesome. Well, I'm really excited next because we're going to be talking about specifically web accessibility, because obviously we're building all sorts of applications with .NET beyond mobile applications. John Galloway from my team actually wrote an entire brand new Microsoft Learn module on building accessible web applications with ASP.NET Core. And what I think is really cool about this is that a lot of the tools and some of the tools and concepts that you just learned apply to web as well. And some of the things that you may learn about web, such as contrast and things, also apply to mobile too. Now, I did put a link right down here on the screen, the aka.ms, for all the accessibility resources that are available out there on the internet. Jamie did a great job of putting them all together into one place. And you'll also find other Microsoft Learn modules, introductory topics into accessibility and building inclusive applications for all, our documentation, and of course, a bunch of links to here. We'll also put Rachel's slide deck on our GitHub, and we'll put it into that accessibility resources folder. So check back in a few days after we get that, which is awesome. Like I said, we are here with the Let's Learn.net. This is a monthly series that we do Fridays near the end of the month. You can go to aka.ms/letslearn.net. It's updated every month. Next month is going to be Blazor. So if you're interested in building web applications, spa type applications with Blazor and Razor and all sorts of good stuff, we'll be doing Blazor next month. So definitely be tuned into there. You can sign up for notifications. All right, without further ado, I'm going to bring in my good friend, John Galloway. How's it going, John?
It's going great. I am quite excited. Man, Rachel did an amazing job, huh?
She's amazing. Every single time I have her on the Xamarin show or every interaction with her, she's absolutely spectacular. So I'm really happy that she was able to take some time this Friday and spend it with all of us learning about building accessible applications. John, you've been a web developer for a while.
25, 20 blah, blah, blah years. Yep. I was doing web development back when you would get these AOL floppy disks in the mail and play with those. Yeah.
and what has your journey with accessibility been? I mean, you've been building websites for a long, long time. Is this something that, you thought about 20 years ago?
It wasn't. But now looking back at things, and as I was writing up this accessibility module, I was seeing that the web was designed for accessibility. And a lot of the time we unintentionally break it by trying to make it look pretty, trying to just not caring, not knowing. So, but a lot of what I've learned over the years with web standards has fit exactly in with accessibility. So it was kind of like a returning to some of the basics there. I was thinking that a lot of things would be, I've got to learn all these weird concepts, and a lot of it's just writing web standard applications.
Yeah, Rachel mentioned earlier about the standards, and I think that that's great that there's all these standards that span multiple devices and web technology. So it's always good to familiarize yourself with those first, just to understand what tons and tons of resources went into, right? You don't have to be, you don't have to go and be the expert and do all the case studies. People have already done it for you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm going to bring up your screen over here and let you take it away.
All right. Yeah. So I'm going to be talking about building accessible web applications. If you'd like to follow along, you can. Here's the, this is linked off of what James linked the accessibility resources earlier.
And then zoom in for me there, John.
All right. Yeah. So there we go.
Perfect.
Well, and right off the bat, we're talking accessibility there, right? So this is a thing where this website works well with Zoom. And people may be browsing on all different kinds of browsers. They could be browsing on a phone. And so this right away, we're talking about something that is accessibility for people that, you know, their site may require a high level of Zoom, but this benefits everyone, right? So I think that's a key feature, and it's something to think about when you're building applications for accessibility. I'm going to be going through this. This module is 52 minutes, and we do not have 52 minutes. But if you'd like to follow along, you can definitely get started. And I'm going to talk a bit, but if you would like to follow along, I'll jump ahead and I'll show you how you can get your code ready for when I start writing the code. So I'm doing a file new project. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code and command line, but you could also just in Visual Studio do a new project and do a web application. So it's just a Razor Pages web application. And all of our code, you're going to copy and paste this into the index.cshtml. So I'm just sharing this right at the beginning before I talk about some of the concepts, so that if you want to jump ahead and be ready when we start fixing this application, you will be ready. So let's go over here and let's talk about some accessibility fundamentals for web applications. You know, Rachel covered a lot of the basics here. Definitely the web impacts billions of people, and many users have some sort of impairment. And, you know, you may jump immediately to thinking about, you know, they're completely blind or something, but a lot of people, they say about 12% of men have color blindness. And there's just all sorts of things. And we notice there, zooming. Some people they may have, you know, standard eyesight, but they may be temporarily working on a device. They may be on a mobile device or an iPad or whatever, and they may need something. So it may be a temporary impairment. There's also legal requirements. Rachel brought up the WCAG. We had something come in on a chat, and somebody said, you know, we may not be doing accessible development because we may not have the budget. Well, keep in mind that do you have the legal budget for defending or for fixing things if there is a problem, right? It's better to build it right the first time and not have to pay for an emergency. Oh no, we have this legal issue, right? And you know, like I've already said a few times, it's going to help everybody. So if you build accessible applications, for instance, I like to use the immersive reader in Edge to read things aloud to me. And if you build your applications so that they're accessible, that will work for everybody, including me. So thank you. So we don't all browse the same. We've already looked at screen readers, and screen readers definitely apply here as well. There's also just visual enhancements, and those include zooming, but it also includes contrast, and you know, all different sorts of different ways that we can enhance things. Janek asking in the chat, what are we talking about here? We're talking about accessibility, all about .NET accessibility today, and I'm talking specifically about web accessibility right now. So, and then there's also other input devices, and you may, you know, be focused on, as you're developing, what are my input devices, but remember, people may be using all kinds of different, you know, touch. They may be using only a keyboard. They may people may be using, there's different things that do eye tracking and a tube that goes in your mouth to, you know, like a breath control. So don't assume anything about the way that your users are browsing your site. Fortunately, web standards are accessible. And I mentioned this earlier chatting with James. The web was designed for accessibility. And in most cases, if you use it the way it was designed to be used, things will kind of naturally work. And the way you get into trouble is focusing completely on visually building something the way that it looks great on your screen. You want to build things, against the standards, and then it's going to work for everyone, regardless of their experience. The ASP.NET Core templates are generally accessible. A few things with this. One is that they use Bootstrap, and Bootstrap is designed for responsive design, so meaning it can handle zooming pretty well. And then the ASP.NET templates also use the semantic markup elements like nav, main, section, and footer. And so, for instance, I mentioned earlier the immersive reader, and that's an example where if you put your content in that main section in a page, that's how immersive reader knows what to read. So if you're just doing divs or your own kind of crazy markup, and you're making things look good for you, you're not following how the templates are set up, and that's where you start to break those things. And finally, there are some great tools. I'm going to be looking at accessibility insights for this, but there's a lot of other great ones out there. And so accessibility insights is it's free tools from Microsoft. There's accessibility insights for Android, Windows, and web. And the web versions are they are some extensions that work for Edge and Chrome. Edge and Chrome. So as part of this, we will go through and we'll install that later. But once you do that, when I click on this, it just pops up and it'll inspect any page that I'm on. So that's the deal there. We are about to start writing some code and fixing some stuff up. So yeah, this is the experience with Accessibility Insights for Web. You click it to launch, and then immediately it does two things. One, it pops up a screen that will give you a detailed report, and also throughout the page, it'll mark up all the issues that it finds. So I only have, this is a high-level overview. Thanks for sharing that in the chat. That's the accessibilityinsights.io. We also did a deeper dive. We did a full show on accessibility for web developers on the .NET Community Stand-Up this week. So Sarah Higley and Chris Heilman, who are experts on this. Sarah has worked on some of this tooling with Accessibility Insights and also works on implementing accessibility for Microsoft for production applications and toolkits. And then Chris Heilman is the lead PM for Edge developer tools, and they've got some fantastic tools coming out inside of Edge for analyzing and fixing your web applications. So really great deep dive there for more of this information. All right, we're going to start with forms accessibility. Forms are one of the top things the ways that we interact with web applications. And so we've talked up until this point, a lot of it has been on experiencing, but already you saw Rachel talked about filling in something with forename and surname and that sort of thing. And we're going to look at a broken application, one that has a form that is not accessible, and we're going to fix it. So here's our example of a broken form. We're going to find out exactly why in just a second. A few other concepts on this. One is this form we'll see does not have labels. So while there's text there that says first name and last name, it's not associated with those input elements. So we need to fix that. And that's easy to do. You just need a label tag, and that label tag needs to be associated using the for attribute to point it at the input element. Also, validation. It's really common for people to roll their own validation. So here's an example of poor validation. I've got an unordered list at the top of the page, and it's just writing a bunch of text out. And this gives it's not tied directly into the form. There's much better ways to do that. And let's get into the code. So hopefully if you followed along with me, you've got a .NET new project, and you've got this index.cshtml. So we're going to start by pasting in some code, and that code is right here in create sample application. I'm scrolling down, and here it says create the data entry form. So I open up index.cshtml. I copy this entire thing, and I'm just going to paste it right over the top. So let's go find our VS Code. I've actually already done that. So here's the code for that. And then down in the terminal window below, I'm using .NET Watch. So I did .NET Watch run. And when I do that, I'm going to see this form. Here we go. This is our running form. And immediately some things, might not jump out to you as being too bad, but there's a form at the top. There's also some other problems scattered throughout the page, and we're going to fix as many as we can now. So I bring up accessibility insights, and I'm going to use FastPass. There's a few things you can do here. There's these ad hoc tools where you can solve a specific problem. There's also, now back to Launchpad. Whew. There's an assessment where you do a very detailed assessment, and it's a checklist, and it's going to have you do things on the page and fix them as you go through. But FastPass is a really quick way to find out immediately what is wrong with your page. And right away, it pops up these two things for me. One is inside the page, I get all these notifications of exactly which elements have problems. But I also get this listing on the side. And so I tend to use both of these. I'll kind of go back and forth. For this part, we want to focus specifically on this form, fixing the form. And so I'm going to move this off the screen, and we're just going to focus right on this form to begin with. So I'm going to click on this, and what do we see here? Right away, we've got some contrast issues, and this points out two problems. One is that the contrast is too low. So for instance, here it says this contrast is 3.97 and we need 4.5 to 1. So, but it also points out a deeper problem, which is we're using color coding to indicate which are required fields. So you're assuming that your users can see in order to process those colors. So let's go through and start fixing some of those things. And to kind of key us in with where we're at on the application. So we've run the app. You can do .NET Run, or you can do .NET Watch Run to automatically update the browser as soon as you make those changes. And then in the next unit, we've already covered these concepts in the PowerPoint slides I just showed you. So these are some of the information here. One thing I didn't dig into is this use of required fields. And so here we're going to be using web standards to indicate required fields instead of our kind of rolled our own, color coding. So here's the steps for going through and doing this. And I'm interested if anyone following in the chat, if anyone's following along and actually doing this, that'd be great. Let me know. Why don't you play games instead? That's a good question. Okay, so we're going to inspect the form. We've done that. We've seen these things pop up, and we're going to just start right at the top. So you'll see that, kind of zooming in on this, we've got our first name, and we've got a few problems. One is we're using text primary, which is a bootstrap color, to color this blue. So that's not great. There's another problem, though. We'll see. When I click on this, this actually says, oh, no, that's a different one. Okay, so let's just fix that. That's easy enough to do. And we're going to do that in 2 steps. We're going to, first of all, remove this text primary. Save that. And then we'll also, the reason that it said text primary was we were wanting to indicate that it's a required field. We're using that blue color. So instead, I'm just going to put a required attribute on this. All right. So now we'll switch back over. And I just love hot reload so much. So I'm using hot reload right now. So on my screen, I could just click on Accessibility Insights to relaunch this if I lost the window, but I just had it over on the side. So I'll click Start Over again. And you'll notice I've already cleared this indication on my first name field. So I'm making great progress. Here it shows I've gone through and I've added this required and I've removed that color coding. So now I can go through and I can continue to do this for the rest of these items. And I'm going to save, I'm skipping ahead a bit, and you can too. We could go through and do each of them one at a time, but I'm actually going to go through, I'm going to copy this, and this replaces my form code. So I'm going to remove all the color coding, and I'm going to set the required field for all of these. So I'm getting rid of text primary and text black 50. That text black 50 is another bootstrap field that says a 50% gray. So here's a neat thing you can do in any of the Visual Studios. You can collapse an element, and then I'm just going to paste over it. So I'll do Control V. And now I've pasted my good code, and I'll save it. And now we'll go back over and we'll take a look at our code. Okay, there we go. So we fixed all of these. Now let's go through and fix our input elements on the side. We'll see what's going on there. So the problem here, there's actually two problems. You'll see there's failure 1 of 2 for this target. And a lot of these things, when you fix one, it points out a deeper problem in your application. And so we'll be looking at that too. Here's an issue. We need a unique ID for every element. So this is saying that this item, this top item, doesn't have a unique ID. So sure enough, when we look at it, we've got ID name for our first name, and we also have ID name for our last name. And I don't know, we may have been assuming we're going to do something fancy with JavaScript and our code behind, but really you need a unique ID. An ID is a unique identifier for an element. So let's make this one first name. I'll make this one last name. So now we've cleared that up, and now we're ready to fix a deeper error. So I'm refreshing the thing here. I just clicked rescan. So now we need a label for every item on the form. And when I look at it, I've got a label. It's first name, and now I've got a last name, and I've got phone. So what's wrong? Well, the problem, and I'll just show you in the exercise text here, the problem is that I am just using a div. So my div says first name or last name. But if you think about a screen reader or any other accessibility tool, there's no way for it to know that this applies to this input. So fortunately, the web was designed around accessibility, and there is a label input element. And so those label input elements look like, instead of using a div, we're going to use a label. So your label uses these IDs. And now we can understand why the ID was so important. We need an ID here that the label can connect to. So these two are connected. Label for first name. So this can have any text here. The important thing is that it's saying these two are connected together. All right. So I'm going to go through and fix both of those. And all of these, I'm going to show you the completed code here. And you'll see that for all of these, it's the standard thing. Label for last name, label for phone. And so we're just connecting labels all the way down. So once we do that, all of those labels will be accessible for a screen reader to be able to, or any other input accessory, to be able to go through and find what label applies to what form field. So I think I copied that. Let's go through and copy it again. And we're going to replace our form with that information. So I'm selecting the entire form, and I'm doing paste. saving it, expand it out. And yep, sure enough, we've got all these labels. And so for each one, it's got an associated label. So now we'll go over here. I'm rescanning again. And we've made a lot of great progress. We've actually broken one thing though. We have some required fields and we don't see them anymore. There's no visual indication of those required fields. So fortunately, we can use web standards. And now that we've put those required elements, we can actually paste some CSS in. So I actually ran past that earlier, but this CSS can target optional elements or required elements. So you can also using sibling selectors, and you could color the labels as well. So I'm not going to do that right now, but that's also something you could do. So I've copied that and I'm just going to paste this in. So there's a few things about this that are nice. One is I'm making this more accessible, but I'm also making it more changeable and like more bug resistant. Because in the future, if I make something else in here, let's say I make the phone field required. Let's do that. I don't need to go through and change the color on the label or whatever. It's automatically going to see that. So now we'll switch over to this and let's refresh. And you already see there's all those are set up, and it's already got that blue coloring around the ones that are required. You'll also see as I mouse over them, it says, please fill out the field. So again, by using the web standards, it's automatically giving me a better indication for everyone and not just people that are using a screen reader. Okay, so we've made some big improvements on that. And now we have all those labels associated. And so here's our kind of final completed information using that. Now, there's one other thing that we want to fix on this form, which is we don't have an input element. Our input element actually is we don't have a button to submit. So again, there's no easy way for a screen reader to be able to show how to submit the form. So we don't need JavaScript to submit a form. We can just use a standard button. So I'm going to replace the button. And this is going to fix two problems for us. One is it's going to make this more accessible from that point of view, but it's also going to fix, there was a contrast issue on this. So this right here failed color contrast. So let's fix that. And so we'll go over here and we're going to replace, I forget now which code I copied. So yes, just the button. All right. So, and I'm just harping on this over and over, but you don't need to build your own button. There are buttons that are built into HTML and CSS and everything. This is an input tag, and so we're just going to use that input tag. So format that more nicely, and then we'll go over. All right. Now, I'm showing you the workflow of we had a broken form and we're fixing it. But what you really want to do is, as you fix these, you want to learn the standards and build it right the first time, and then you don't have a lot of bugs to fix. So it's better, and it doesn't cost you any more to build accessible applications if you just build it right the first time. So we fixed quite a few things there. I think that may be about the end of this, except one of my favorite and unused features of the web, which is I'm calling these all text fields. So you'll see already now by using required, it's at least a better experience because all the required fields are given that indication. I didn't have to write JavaScript. I didn't have to write any fancy UI. That's built into the browsers. It's built into your mobile browsers, built into all the web. Okay, but here I've got a phone number, I've got a date, and I've got an email, and I can give a better experience for everyone. And I can do that using the right type attributes. So instead of using text for everything, I can use telephone, date, and email. So let's do that real quick. Switch over here. So for email, instead of type equals, instead of text, I'll say email. Here, I'll say date. And phone, I'll say tel. So again, a lot of the time people will use some kind of fancy library or some kind of, JavaScript toolkit. You can use what's built into the web. And now I have a date picker. Again, this is completely browser standard. This will work everywhere. Watch what happens when I type in, it's validating top to bottom. I believe there, see, I don't need a regular expression. I don't need JavaScript to validate email addresses. I just use the modern web. What's great here is, again, this will work with your screen readers. This will work with all your different accessibility tools. If I wrote my own date dropdown, I'd need to test and make sure it's accessible. Don't do that. You use the accessibility budget that the Microsoft accessibility browser team is already put into making sure that this is accessible. So, questions. Is there a way to customize date for other cultures? So yeah, and again, because this is using the standard, the browser will handle that automatically. So good question. What about autofocus and keyboard shortcuts? So yes, you can do that. And there are ARIA attributes for doing that. I don't have time to get into that in detail. What I'd recommend doing, like definitely setting those shortcuts using those ARIA attributes. So, and that was something that we covered in a little more detail in the web accessibility thing on Tuesday in the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. So I believe we're done with this. And if you're following along and you want to get your application to this state, you can just copy this and replace the entire form, and that'll get you to this level. All right, we are back we have fixed our form. And if you just do that in your applications, you're going to make things so much better for all your users, not just those with accessibility issues. So now let's talk about some deeper visual fixes. And when you do that, I mentioned before, color blindness is a lot more common than most people think. So it affects about 12% of men. A lot of people, have some sort of different visual perception. And another thing to think about is they may have a temporary accessibility issue caused by their device. Perhaps they're in an area with a lot of glare, or maybe they're using an old device or something where the color calibration's off, right? So again, this is an area where visual fix can help everybody. Contrast. Contrast's another thing where people may have different visual abilities there. And here's an example. When I'm doing my coding here, I actually prefer dark mode on everything. Anytime I'm using Visual Studio Code, any developer tool, I prefer dark mode. But here I'm using the standard light mode because it's going to work better for everybody, right? So and also you'll notice, like, really top-notch applications. Look at this one down at the bottom. Here it says theme. There's light, dark, and high contrast. So, that's an example of using contrast and how contrast can help everybody. It's actually built in also to browsers now, where it can fall back to the user's operating system standards. So, all right. And then one other thing is zoom. And again, if you build and follow the Bootstrap templates, those will work. But regardless, you should practice looking at your applications in high zoom. Zoom all the way up to 200% on a regular basis and make sure it works well. So this is the sort of thing, here's the .NET website. This is how I normally browse it. But as part of testing, it needs to be able to work. Here it is up at 200%. And you'll see this is using the browser standards. And the whole idea here is your application needs to work well at 200%. And bonus, it'll just work well for people on mobile as well. All right, so we can fix a few visual issues pretty quickly. I'm going to go pretty quick because we're running short on time. But so as I do that, here's what's in the visual fixes area. Okay. So we'll run our thing again, and I'm clicking on this. This is what I've been clicking over on the side. Start again. So now we've got color contrast. And again, we've already fixed some of the color contrast issues. You'll see now we've got some other ones that are highlighted. And so these things here, this looked good to our designer. They wanted a gray background and gray text, but this is not accessible to people that have an issue that requires higher contrast. So the easiest way to do this, and you're going to have to think through this from a design perspective, but you'll need to go through and you'll say, okay, I can either make the text darker or I can get rid of the background. And in this case, I've decided that I want to get rid of the BG light. So here, all of these have BG light backgrounds and they have a text muted text class. So in my case, I want to get rid of that text muted. So I'm going to go over here and we'll take a look at all these and see here we've got text muted. Now I've made these relatively easy because I'm using the standard Bootstrap things. You may need to go through and it may require CSS changes or something. And again, this is why it's easier to do it from the start rather than requiring to go back and fix it and debug more complicated CSS. Now we'll go through here. You'll notice it wasn't a huge difference, but now this is a darker color of text. And so all those accessibility issues went away there. We've got one last one on our pizza. We'll get to that, but we're making some really good progress. So now let's talk screen readers. Some things to look at with screen readers. Tab stops. So tab stops are how a user navigates through a page. And we think of tab as a tab key, but anything else could be a screen reader also navigating through a page. Those are really easy to check using Accessibility Insights. It has a tool where it'll visually show you the tab stops as you navigate. And what I've found is, for the most part, tab stops, like, you have to try almost to break them, but if you're using a complex control, for instance, it might break things. Marcus, I agree. It's not a very beautiful pizza. The reason that pizza is not quite as beautiful as it could be is because I really wanted to fit it into something that could be copied and pasted. And so this is the entire thing for that pizza. It is using a data URL with some SVG, and I shrunk it down to, I think this might even fit in a tweet. So, okay, so tab stops is a thing. Another is landmarks. So landmarks include things like headings. It also includes those big elements. So things like main, section, nav. So those are ways that screen readers will announce to people, here are the different headings in the page. And then they can say, jump to heading 3, and they can navigate using those landmarks. So we've broken landmarks on this, and we'll fix those up. And then finally, images and alt tags. So an image is something visual. If it's important in the page, then you need to add some alt text. If not, you need to add some blank alt text. So let's go through and do some of those screen reader fixes. So here we are. So we have just talked through this, and there's more information here with information about going to a screen reader and those sorts of things. And oops, we'll just skip on to the actual doing the things. Yeah, Sebastian says it'd be nice if the accessibility extension restarted when the page is reloaded. And I think so, although it may be, that might be frustrating if I'm trying to look at something and this keeps changing around, but that's definitely that's definitely worth asking about. So we're going to fix that alt text. So it shows up. Here's the issue with that alt tag on the image. So we have an image of a dubious looking pizza, and we could add alt text to that. So the way you want to think about this is, if you were reading this page, if you were describing this page to someone, say you're looking at this website and your friend is sitting on a chair across the room and you're saying, wow, I'm looking at this page and it has a list of pizzas and blah, blah, blah. For this, is this worth telling them about this pizza? I could say there's an ugly little clip art pizza on the page. They probably don't want to know about that. So in this case, I can just add an empty alt tag. So that's what I'm going to do. So that empty alt tag tells the screen reader, yes, I know about this image. Yes, I thought about this putting an alt tag, and this is a purely decorative thing. So I'll just say alt equals quotes. So it's just an empty alt. And because of that, now I can go over here and I can check this. I'm restarting the scan. And now get this happy thing. So it doesn't mean I'm done, but it means I've fixed all the obvious things that it could find. So that's good stuff. And again, if I had something that I did feel was important to describe, then I would say, this is a picture of our whatever pizza and it shows something, or this is a diagram and there are 4 important things in this diagram. So you would describe it as if you were reading it to somebody else. Okay. So now we're going to check tab stops, and we're going to be pretty close to done with what we're able to get through for this page. So I mentioned the tab stops tool is cool, and I think it's pretty awesome. Here I'm going to go to tab stops, and I'm going to turn on the show tab stops, and I'll scroll up to the top and I'll just click up here, and then I hit the tab key. See, it's navigating through. So this is all good so far. It's navigating through the form. But now it's skipped down to this thing that says click here. And if you're thinking about reading aloud, click here doesn't tell me anything. So that's something we can fix. And then here it goes down to the bottom. So those tab stops are looking kind of okay, but we're seeing that it's not a great experience directly with that. And let's take a look here. Okay. So we've tested out our tab stops. We've seen that the tab generally moves along where you'd want it to go. Again, the only way I've seen to break that really is if I'm using some kind of JavaScript or some kind of strange control library that doesn't handle things. Okay, we can try going through this with the screen reader. I'm going to move pretty quick on it. We're not going to look too much, but I'll give it a shot. So if I go, okay, we'll go to this. So I'll go Control. I'm using Windows Narrator.
Starting narrator, scan, link, accessible web home 1 of 2 level 1, privacy heading level 1 welcome we hope you like pizza.
And
First name, last name, phone, month, birthday, show date.
Hopefully, I think that's audible.
Address, submit.
Yep, we can hear it. We can hear it, John.
Okay, great. So you'll notice there, it just said click here. So not useful, right? It just read link, click here. So this is the kind of testing you can do. This is built-in VoiceOver you have on Mac or Narrator on Windows. I'm hitting Control Windows Enter to turn on and off. Okay. So let's go over and see if we can fix a few of these real quick. Oh, here's another thing I did want to show with that is the use of landmarks and headings. So I'm going to go back into this and we'll launch this real quick. Control.
Starting narrative link.
Okay.
Accessible web home 1 of 2 level 1.
So if I say
Welcome,
1,
level 1.
So level 1, you should only have one H1 on a page.
Join our mailing list. No next heading. No next heading level 1.
So here it says there's no next heading.
No next heading level 2. No next heading level 3.
Okay. So I'm going to leave most of this as as an exercise to the reader. We're going to want to have time to wrap up, but I'm going to show you what you would do in order to fix this. Okay. And what's wrong with our code. So this comes from writing creative HTML. You'll see here that this looks on the page, this delivery options looks like a heading, but it's really, I just blew the font size up and used a bold tag. You'd be surprised how often I see things like this where people are just using CSS or style. And so that's breaking these. These are not headings, even though they should be, right? So instead of getting creative, what I need to do is go through and fix these to use H1, H2, or H3 tags. So that would fix that. And I believe that's what we do for this next part, is fix those H1, H2, H3. And then the final thing here is just think about, instead, I would want to do, instead of click here, which again doesn't mean anything when I come to it with a screen reader, I want to replace that with something like this. View our privacy policy for more options. So, and if you go through this, then you'll get to hear the screen reader read it aloud to you, and you can rejoice when you finish that up. So let's just sum up with some of these things. accessibilityinsights.io. It's free. It's really awesome. It's built on top of Axe Core, which is a standard thing that's used across a lot of other things that support CI/CD and other things that you can do. And then there's the accessible web apps with ASP.NET Core, which is what we just went through. There's also an accessibility fundamentals learning path that you can take a look at. And let me see, that's it for my slides. So, tried to real whirlwind tour there, but I think some good things to be aware of.
Yeah, it's absolutely great. It's also great to see Accessibility Insights. I use Accessibility Insights on my Windows machine as well. What's really nice about that is there's a color picker, so you can do contrast ratios, and it'll tell you as you hover over and pick a different elements on the screen or here or there, it will go ahead and tell you if it's accessible or not accessible, or different contrast ratios you have. I use that all the time for work there. And actually, John was saying that Accessibility Insights is available for web, Windows, and Android. And I think it's available on Mac and Linux too, because it's a app. I'm pretty sure, I'm not positive. I don't know if there's any plans for iOS. I'd have to ask the team that, John. Good question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. We're right pretty much at time. And all of this will be on demand on the .NET YouTube at youtube.com/.net. All the Let's Learn live events are there, or you can actually go to https live.net. I guess you don't need to type in https, but just live.net. And on the right-hand side, there is all of the shows, part of .NET Live TV and Let's Learn .NET is there. So you can see all the back episodes there too. John's going to try to bring up his screen.
Yeah,
look at that.
sure, why not?
We're right there. And it's right there. Yeah. Boom. Look at that.
You've got the Let's Learn. This was just my plug here. This is if you go into the community stand-up, this is that accessibility for web developers. But yeah, all these Let's Learn, these are all here.
Yeah, awesome. I have also posted in a few surveys. We like to do this and get a little bit more information about everyone tuning in. If you've been viewing on Microsoft Learn, we've been asking you questions and surveys along the way. Would love if you could fill out some of those before this event goes away in 3 minutes. Things like how you would rate the event today, the difficulty level, and your experience level, and kind of your background. And additionally, I just posted a link the Stream Elements bot did on both Twitch and YouTube, which asks you, it's literally 3 or 4 questions, 5 questions about kind of a little bit about what you thought about the events and how we can make the Let's Learn events even better in the future. It's all anonymous. You don't even need to sign in or anything like that. It literally will take you 5 seconds to do. That's it, John. Super duper appreciate it. Showing off all the awesome web accessibility. And thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Hi, cool. See you, John. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to the Let's Learn.net accessibility here on YouTube, Twitch, and on Learn TV. We are back every single month with new Let's Learn.net events, helping you get started building awesome applications for just about everything with .NET. Next month will be Blazor, June 25th, my birthday. Perfect day. 6 months perfectly in between Christmas and my birthday, June 25th. So it's a good 6-month ratio. Gift giving perfection, I like to say. Yeah, we'll be back talking about Blazor. Jamie will be back hosting that one with some special guests. So check out aka.ms/letslearn.net. And you will find all of the information for the upcoming events. We have many, many more coming, including Blazor, like I said, next month, F#, .NET MAUI, a whole bunch more in the future. And yeah, if you could take just a few seconds to fill out that survey coming in from Twitch or YouTube, would super appreciate that. But that's going to do it for this month's Let's Learn.net event. So until next month, thank you so much for tuning in and have an absolutely delightful weekend. Bye.